Greetings to all lovers of mysticism and secrets. Today, our past is covered not only with enigmas and mysteries that date back ages, but also with a profound layer of soil. The soil conceals from us massive buildings, entire floors, and ancient structures. Our entire history extends far, far away. No, not into the past, but deep underground. Capitals, constructions, monuments, all are covered by layers of soil, and at times, layers of sand. But where did all this come from? And, most importantly, what does it conceal beneath its surface? Let's find out. Sometimes, our eyes are incapable of recreating the entire picture of what we see. Gazing at buildings, we only see the tip of an iceberg that goes deep into the bowels of the earth. But was it always like this? Where did these tons of cultural layers come from, covering entire floors? But does it all end with the soil? After all, we still don't know what these dunes, as tall as houses, hold beneath them. Where did all this sand come from? What could have happened for an entire continent to turn into lifeless desert, with only oil and petrified organic matter remaining instead of water? Everything is submerged under the scorching sun and absolute silence. Today, we will delve into these sands and discover the true reason behind the emergence of the deserts we all know. And in the end, we will explore what's unusual about these sands, whether they are artificial or not. By the end of the video, we will look at photographs that don't fit into our known history. It's astonishing, the remains of iron railways in Africa. It's even strange why they haven't been talked about before. I've always wondered why they keep excavating and excavating, always finding something deep underground. Under the soil, under the sand, they uncover entire floors, houses, and even cities. They tell us it's all part of the cultural layer. Well, at least it's not a layer of dust. Although the comparisons are similar. But archaeologists dig up the remains of cities at depths of over 2 meters. It's known, for example, that in the far north, the cultural layer grows very slowly. Usually, it increases by 1 centimeter per 100 years. Jaegel in the peat grows for 2 months a year, and there is almost no decomposition, preserving everything very well. So, the logical question arises, where does this layer come from? But maybe it comes from the same place as the layer of sand. After all, the mystery of the deserts doesn't leave anyone indifferent. It's just fascinating. A vast sandbox, the size of a continent. Deserts. Kilometers of sand. Heat. Drought. Sahara immediately comes to mind. It seems to be the largest desert in the world, but no, it yields to one other, the most vast and mysterious desert, Antarctica. Yes, Antarctica is also a desert. But today we'll focus only on sandy ones. We'll find out where all this sand came from. Have you ever noticed the simple fact that there are no sandy deserts in America? Except for one small one. While on the African continent, everything is covered with sand. Deserts are scattered chaotically all over the map. And it's not limited to just one continent. Every desert is like a burial ground of ancient civilizations. But the biggest question arises about the origin of the Great Desert. That's how the locals refer to the Sahara, from Arabic. The largest and most merciless desert in the world, the Sahara. The harsh climate and temperature regime make life impossible in this desert. The climate is highly prone to extreme fluctuations. During the day, the thermometer rises above 30 degrees Celsius, while at night, it drops to 0 and sometimes even -10. The sands of the Sahara have swallowed animals, people, and entire cities for centuries. Even now, the desert continues to expand, engulfing new territories as if nothing happened. But where does it originate? How did a desert the size of a continent come to be? By the way, the sizes of continents are not as straightforward as we think. Take Russia, the largest contiguous territory according to the Mercator projection. Africa, it turns out, is twice the size of this country. But we are used to seeing maps just the way they are. We often blindly believe what we are taught, starting from school. If scientists say Africa is like this, then there's no room for doubt. Now, here's a real comparison between Africa and Russia. Perhaps it will open someone's eyes, although, in principle, no one has been hiding this information. Anyone interested can take the size of Russia, 17 million square kilometers, and compare it with Africa's 30 million square kilometers. But usually, we simply believe what we are told without delving deeper. Can you imagine these proportions? But where did so much sand come from? It certainly didn't fall from the sky. In general, deserts are striking with their structure and forms. Just look at the clear contrast division. The Atacama Desert in Chile also doesn't fit into the history that is presented to us. After all, this desert rightfully holds the title of the driest in the world. According to NASA reports, the Atacama Desert in Chile is the driest desert on Earth. It is 50 times drier than Death Valley in California, USA. The desert covers over 105 square kilometers and mainly consists of mineral basins, lava flows, and sand. The average annual precipitation in this region is only 1 millimeter. But how surprising it was for the world when, against all the words and beliefs of historians, this desert bloomed. It's astonishing. A desert breaking all the scientists' stereotypes. Look at this desert. No, it's not Antarctica, and it's not a layer of snow. It's sand. Pure white sand, where ordinary quartz has been replaced by gypsum, completely changing the scenery. Perhaps, for many people, deserts are associated only with high sandy dunes, whimsical shapes of sand ridges, cacti, and almost no vegetation or animal inhabitants. However, sands only occupy 15% of the Sahara's territory, and the main landscape consists of rocky plateaus. But how did all this form? How did these sandy plateaus appear? It's interesting to know what textbooks say about this. And they say that it was all eaten by goats, cows, sheep, and camels. Domestic animals ate all the vegetation, which simply couldn't regenerate. Can you imagine the amount of livestock capable of eating all the vegetation on a continent? I think it's impossible. It's more likely that the top layer of soil, with roots and all growing things, was simply removed. In other words, the land was peeled off to ruin the area, so that even the seeds that got there couldn't sprout. Suppose there was livestock, that means there was also civilization, and a huge one at that. But did it leave any traces? Well, it did. Some traces we are gradually discovering, while others remain buried in the sand for centuries. What's quite astonishing is that if we excavate under all this sand, we'll find clay and soil residues. So, fertile lands existed, but suddenly, within a short period, they were buried by sand. Just look at the level of the ground and the desert lying next to it. And this is the Gobi Desert. It's like someone poured a huge heap of sand on top of the land. But can you imagine what might be under that heap? Yes, not just buried houses, but entire cities. Maybe they are still there, we just have no knowledge of them. Strange coincidences, but it turns out that the sites of modern deserts were once centers of ancient civilizations. You can see this on old maps, of which there are plenty. Once upon a time, long ago, life was bustling here, fortresses stood, fields awaited harvest, and domestic animals grazed on pastures. Wild animals roamed these lands in search of prey, and rivers were teeming with fish. Let's take a look at one of the maps from the past, Africa, in 1688. We see an abundance of cities and rivers. The coast is densely populated, and in the center of the desert, there are numerous large cities. Just a reminder, this is the 17th century. Now, let's compare it to a modern map of Africa. It's a lifeless piece of stone, drying out completely, where many cities vanished without a trace, or perhaps simply disappeared under mountains of sand. And here's another map. Oddly enough, maybe the cartographers simply made a mistake and accidentally drew cities. Take, for example, this map from the 16th century. There are no deserts on it at all, but instead, there's a fairly flourishing climate and a high density of civilization features with cities and metropolises in the areas that are now deserts. But the most remarkable thing is that the continent is depicted as green. And right in the center, there's even a forest. And for some reason, Europeans are depicted on this picture. Some kings, towers, castles. How did all of this end up in Africa in the 17th century? Or is there something we don't know? If the cartographers drew some city, then theoretically, it should exist. Well, at least its remains. Indeed, there are ongoing and quite successful excavations. But in most cases, they are simply silenced due to tense political events. They search and they find. Relatively recently, on the edge of the famous Sahara Desert, they discovered a city that had been concealed by the sands for over 1,000 years. Thamagati. It's an extremely rare example of a well-preserved public library. Manuscripts on religion, military history, and state administration were housed there. The surviving shelves of this institution can still be observed amidst the ruins of the city today. En el centro mismo del desierto del Sahara hay un monumento natural muy interesante. Paris los restos de los cimientos de una ciudad completamente intacta, lo que nos indica que la población de África era bastante desarrollada hasta hace poco, lo que les permite construir edificios y ciudades bastante avanzadas para la época. But then came the drought. The sand engulfed an entire settlement in an instant. And the blooming continent with its gardens and forests, and its people, vanished into nothingness. According to map analysis, this all happened relatively recently, and now it is the largest and most merciless sandy desert in the world. Recently, the Sahara has become completely inaccessible for exploration. Bloody conflicts blaze along almost all its borders, where oil is extracted instead of water. And in place of the fight for oil, there comes another war, the fight for water. For the people living there, water is invaluable. After all, they won't drink oil, they still need to quench their thirst somehow. But did you know that there's an entire sea under the Sahara? Not just underground rivers or lakes, but entire seas. For example, if we compare these volumes, it would be enough to supply the entire continent with water for 500 years. Gaddafi knew about this and decided to use the water for the benefit of his people, creating the largest project of building a modern civilization, the Great Man-Made River, which he called the eighth wonder of the world. The total length of this underground artificial river is about 4,000 kilometers, but the most important thing is that the Libyan government did not charge the population for water. After all, there's an entire sea there, there's enough for everyone. But we know how it all ended. With the loss of Gaddafi, his ideas and hopes for the future were lost as well. Towards the end, I'd like to show you some very strange roads in the desert. In the center of the desert in Mali, these so-called roads stretch for many kilometers. But what are they? Do you think they might be railways? Well, how else could people move around such a vast continent in the past? But what's also interesting, besides these walls and nearby small extinct volcanoes, the Sahara has huge craters in terms of volume and depth. These aren't lunar or Martian landscapes. This is the Sahara, the Great Desert, reliably hiding numerous secrets of the past. Now, only pickups with machine guns are driving on these dunes, either protecting or, on the contrary, repelling all unwanted guests from this place. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to share it with your loved ones so that they know the truth. And subscribe, as there are many more fascinating explorations ahead. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next videos.